Thanks everyone for joining us for this first of our Ready, Set, Grow webinar gardening series. So we have a lineup of speakers, 2 each month, coming in to talk about all things gardening. So today we have Planting the Fall Veggie Garden with John Garlisch of Bernalillo County Extension. And I also want to introduce all of our hosts. So all of the hosts are NMSU Cooperative Extension faculty. We have Suzanne Cole from Mora County, John Garlisch from Bernalillo, Linda Garvin is with us from Valencia County, Sarah Moran-Duran with Bernalillo County Extension, Amanda Skidmore with Integrated Pest Management. She's our extension specialist. And then again, I'm Marisa Thompson, and I'm the Urban Horticulture Specialist. And together we have decided to put on this webinar series. So thank you again for joining us. And I would like to invite John to share your screen.
Good deal. So welcome everybody. And to start off with, you need to know your climate. Throughout the state of New Mexico, some people may have gotten frost this morning already. I was speaking with some friends out in the western part, north of Grants and Gallup, and they had little pockets of frost and got pretty cold last night. So some of you may have not got some frost, but what are the shade and the sun patterns at your house and your farm? Right now, the sun is going to be moving from the northern sky down to the southern sky. How does that change things for how you are going to grow your produce? Looking at your elevation, the higher up in elevation, it might be colder in some places. Are you lower down? Here in Albuquerque, the elevation plays some role, but also if you look at the valley floor versus the mesas and the East Mountains, you have a lot of diversity in when the temperatures come. And also with the urban pressures, does that raise your temperature, or are you out in the country? What about those canyon winds? Are you pretty much open prairie? Do you have canyon winds coming in, or are you protected? So where you sit your vegetable beds, how is that going to play into things with the winds? And are you protected? And the bigger thing, looking at your first frost date, when is it going to be really cold? Do you have enough time to get your plants up and growing? As well as temperature swings, where it might be 50 degrees during the day, but plummet down to the teens and 20s at night. Some of our plants can take those temperatures. Other times, we may have to be outside during the day to open our gardens up so they don't overheat, but then also protecting them at night so that way they do not freeze out or get hit by the cold. So you have to know what your climate is. I get asked, what should I plant right now, or what should I do? It really depends on where you live and how much longer your growing season is going to be. So with that said, here's some quick average dates. And even with average dates, you have to give yourself some wiggle room of anywhere from 2 weeks prior to 2 weeks later. So as I mentioned earlier, Grants and Gallup area, some people may have seen some frost this morning. So, and up at Raton and Springer, it may have gotten cold enough as well, but normally early to mid-September is when their first frost usually hits here in New Mexico, followed by Las Vegas and the East Mountain areas, probably Chama and Espanola. Starting around the beginning of October to mid-October is when the Rio Grande Valley with Albuquerque, Santa Fe, Portales, and it never fails in my 10 years here. Usually one of the 2 weekends of Balloon Fiesta, Albuquerque, some parts of town will experience some type of frost. So usually that first or second weekend, usually between the 5th and 10th, you can expect a frost coming here for Albuquerque. So as we move down, October 15th to 20th would be Albuquerque, especially along the Northeast Heights and the West Mesa, where you have more urban pressure, and Farmington as well. And then lastly, for Halloween, we bring in Las Cruces, Silver City, Alamogordo, Roswell, and Carlsbad. So you can see the breadth of time. For those colder areas, you really need to get your stuff in quickly and get it up, and then you'll have to protect it. Down south, you have a little bit longer for your warm season crops before you need to start planting your cool season crops. And the two links on the side have some great, if you want to see for your particular area, if I didn't get your city listed on here, click on one of those two links to see what the average first frost date is, what was the earliest, and what is the latest. So that way you can kind of see what your area and temperature is going to be. One of the next things to do right now is start with some garden cleanup. You need to make room for those fall veggies to come in, but I need to harvest all my tomatoes. The answer is no. In some of the early colder areas, most of the tomatoes that are blooming now will not set fruit nor ripen in time by the time the frost hits. So you can start trimming back those tomatoes and trimming back those vines, especially in the cooler areas. For those in the warmer areas, I would start trimming back probably the end of September, 1st of October, because most of those that bloom October 1 down south will not ripen before the first frost hits. So start pruning back some of those summer veg. Your corn stalks, if you want to cut now to make a lovely fall display. You can remove all your disease plants. And with the heat that we've had this year, a lot of plants have looked meager and are suffering. I would remove all of those and start to have a clean slate. And if you do have a cover crop in there, kudos to you. You need to terminate that at least 2 weeks. It's better to do 3 or 4 weeks prior to when you're going to plant. So start preparing that bed. So get rid of the summer veg crops and get rid of those disease plants and start to make room for planting for your fall vegetables. For soil prep, and I'm going to speak both sides to this one. If you are in a new raised bed situation, as well as if your existing raised beds are completely dried out, you need to rehydrate your whole soil profile. Yes, I'm saying you have to disturb the soil and you have to move the soil. If you're brand new with your raised beds, or if your raised bed's completely dried out, mix them like you do concrete or cake batter. If you see the picture in the top of your screen with the kid working the soil, you can see it was watered. It looks beautifully moist on top. But when you scrape just a 1/4 to a 1/2 inch down, it was completely dry. You need to really get the whole soil profile moistened to start. Once it is moistened to start, then it will continually to retain. But if it has been left to dry out, you are killing off the good microbiology and all the hard work. So start with a fully hydrated soil if you can. The picture on the bottom are some strawberries that are in a raised bed situation. If you look at them closely, you can see there were some drip emitters and you can see a small rain of water. The rest of the bed is dry. All of that dry pulled that moisture away, and you can see how the plants are suffering. And when I scraped down, that whole bed was dry. So if you are going to plant vegetables in a raised bed situation like this, you fully need to rehydrate your soil before planting. Your plants will be thankful for you. Also, add compost 1 week before planting, so that way it can start to break down and really work into the soil. If you have cover crops, get them chopped down, broken up, broken into the soil at least 3 weeks before planting. If you do it too soon before you plant, sometimes what will happen is as the plants will break down, they'll either smother the seed or there's some toxicity with the plants breaking down. So you need to allow some time for those cover crops to be terminated, whether you cut them, mow them, turn them under, whatever that case may be. You need to get those cover crops terminated and incorporated at least 2 to 3 weeks, better for 4. Tilling versus no-till or minimal tillage. If your beds have completely dried out, you do need to work the soil. If you have a good cover crop basis or your beds were very active this past year, you may only need to do very minimal tillage. So that's something where If the less that you can work the soil, the better off you are going to be. But there are times where you may need to till the soil. So you need to see what condition your beds are in, how healthy is that soil going in, and that will determine, do I need to rehydrate and really work the soil, or is my soil in good condition and I just have to disturb it very little. And my hope and goal is that you can get towards the minimal tillage in the end. For raised beds, you may have to do a little bit more work. If you did do cover crop, fantastic, but you may have to turn that soil a little bit more or amend it every so often. And certain raised beds, depending on how thin they are, you may need to put some straw bales around them to protect them later on. If you're doing in-ground, you may have to work the soil a little bit. Make sure you're keeping the plants evenly watered. And I would put a mulch down if you are planting with that. Continuing on with soil health, the soil health is the root of all problems. Yes, pun intended. But if you have poor soil, you'll get poor results. If you have healthy soil, you'll get a lot better results. So we need to really protect our soil, and the fall is a great time to do so. If you do not want to plant any vegetables, or if you have plots that you're going to be taking out later, I would put that into a cover crop. I was speaking with some of our soil scientists, and they are recommending barley, especially if you have salinity issues, or triticale. Winter wheat and cereal rye is also okay. You'll want to do at least 3 or 4 species. You better not do one, but not do 10 or 15. That sweet spot is about 4 to 6. So a couple different grasses, a couple different legumes, such as the common vetch or the winter pea. You can also do some of the radishes, the turnips, or the white clover. If you do a legume, you need to make sure it is inoculated before planting it. They are recommending common vetch over hairy vetch because hairy vetch will establish itself and become more of a nuisance than a benefit. So look at that. So common vetch, Austrian winter peas, canola or rapeseed, daikon radish, turnips, berseem white clover, and triticale barley. A good mix of any of those for the fall into the winter months will be great for you. You need to have at least 6 weeks of good growth. So I know we had we may be close on some of those colder climates, so get them in the ground now before you get those heavy colds later on in October and early November. If you don't have the opportunity for doing a cover crop, what I would suggest is covering the soil with either shredded leaves, with straw, and manure to age out or compost. Here we have one of our raised beds here at our office and our demonstration garden with some master gardeners who are working. A couple years ago, we moistened the soil and then we covered it with straw to keep it moist all winter long. So if you can keep your soil moist and not desiccating from the wind and the sun, it will be very active for you next spring and you'll see better results. With our sun and our wind and an ongoing drought, all of that dries out the soil, kills many of the microbes, and kills many of the beneficial insects that we have. So it is a good idea to cover your soils to keep them moist and to keep the fungi and the bacteria and all the living little critters active and happy. That way you're ready for next spring. So think about your watering. Yes.
John, this is Marisa. We had a question come in that is about crimson clover for winter cover. And can you speak to that?
So crimson clover, I asked our specialists about that. They said any of the clovers are fine. They recommend berseem white clover for the fall and probably the crimson clover for next spring.
Thank you.
Any others on the soil health?
That's it. Thanks very much.
If you plant crimson clover out now, some of the warmer climates, I think, will do better than some of the colder climates. So you just have to know what's best for your area. Lastly, you need to water your beds even during the winter months. We think we just want to hibernate during the winter, but we shouldn't. All of your plants will need water in the winter. And the best water meter is your index finger. Stick that in the ground to see how dry your soil actually is. If you are going to be growing in the winter, you do need to figure out how you are going to bring water to your beds. Do you need to drain your lines and your hoses after each use? And I know in some parts, especially on the eastern part of the state and then the southern part of the states, our well water is starting to become deeper, and some of it we've been having salinity and brackish issues. So be careful with the water that you are using, because sometimes, especially with drip irrigation or if you have high salinity, you could be building up salts on top of your soil and killing off your plants inadvertently. If you can get some good snow melt and harvest some rainwater, if we can get some rain, that would be the best opportunity, some good water for your plants to be had. Some water is better than no water, but just be careful about the quality of the water that you are putting onto your plants. And please keep all your plants hydrated during the winter months. So, any questions on this soil health and or watering? If so, put it into the chat box while I get some water here.
Thanks, John. That's great info. There's one question that has come in. What about softened water in potassium?
So softened water and potassium, with softened water, you are using salts. So it does sometimes have a higher salt content. If you use that on occasion, that's fine. I would not use it solely. So if you're able to diversify your water sources, that would be great. On occasion is fine, but not long term.
Another question has come in. What's brackish?
So brackish is higher salinity content, as well as it has other chemicals and other dissolved minerals that make it hard to use, has an off-putting taste to it. Some people may have higher arsenic levels. Some people may see a iron or brownish color to it. And some people, if they're closer to the oil, they'll have some of that greasiness to it as well. So it could be any of those.
Thank you. And then one more about suitable cover crops for northern New Mexico.
So for northern New Mexico, any of these will work just fine.
Great.
So I'm going back here to the fall cover, winter cover. The person who I asked was Kevin Branham, who lives out there near Grant. And he was recommending these that he uses for his fall cover and winter cover crops. So any of these are great for northern New Mexico.
Thank you. Oh, one more came in about watering, and maybe you'll cover this. What's the best time of day to water when nights freeze? And what about ditch water?
Ditch water so if you're watering in ground, you may have some access to ditch water. Most of the ditches are going to be drained and dry. So it just depends on if you actually have access to ditch water for watering. During the colder months, I would water about mid-morning when it's a little bit warmer to be outside, and you have the rest of the day for it to soak into. So I would say between 10 and 11 o'clock in the morning, if you're able, would be best. If you are going to work, I would say then probably watering in the morning. Also, you don't need to water every day. So when it's warmer out, the plants will need more water. When it's colder out, they are going to be slow going. And also check with your handy dandy expensive water meter on your hand to see if there's soil moisture. If there's adequate soil moisture and you're mulching your beds, you may only need to water maybe once a week or twice a week. So look at what the weather is doing, check the soil moisture with your hand, and if you do need to water, make sure the temperature is warm enough to do so, and I would probably water mid-morning if that is an opportunity for you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So now that we have soil health and some of the gardening techniques, what to do, What can you plant right now? There's a whole bunch of things that you can start planting. All of them will have differing things. And I did include spring flowering bulbs because you need to get them in right now. So as you're working your other stuff, it's not just about the veg that's edible, but think about what brings you pleasure next spring, and that way you have something to look forward to. So right now, September and October. So September for the cooler regions, October for the warmer regions. Time to plant your daffodils, your crocus, hyacinths, tulips, irises, and all your early spring blooming bulbs. How deep that you plant them is based on the size of the bulb itself. So daffodils, hyacinths, and tulips get planted deeper. Some of the crocus, some of the muscari, grape hyacinths, and others, they should be planted more shallowly. Irises need to be planted more on the top. All of them require some level of chilling hours to bloom. When you do plant them, make sure you plant the flat side down and the pointed side up. Sometimes it's hard to do that. In some areas, if you have a lot of squirrel pressure, you may want to get some finer small hole chicken wire or other mesh that you can wrap around the plants. Make sure it's big enough for the plants to get through, but small enough that the squirrels cannot get into. So long as the ground is workable and pliable, you can plant your spring flowering bulbs. But when the ground freezes, make sure that your bulbs are already in there. They do need to set some roots this fall before growing next spring. So get your bulbs in the ground here mid-September through October, and hopefully you can have some beautiful spring bulbs blooming for next spring. Garlic, it's coming on to that time as well. The best time to plant garlic for the cooler areas is going to be mid-September to early October. For the warmer climate areas, mid-October to early November. The hardneck garlic varieties are going to be best for the colder areas. There's a whole slew of them, but make sure you get hardneck and not softneck. It prefers looser soil and not so much the heavy clay. It will grow in clay, but it does not perform as well. And especially if you have a wet winter, it tends to rot out in the clay. It prefers cooler temperatures. Plant 1 to 3 inches deep, as well as 4 to 6 inches apart so it can grow. And I would highly recommend mulching it after you plant. You will see some green growth coming up already this fall if you do it well. Just make sure that that's protected. It will do fine for most of our winters. And then just let it mature until next year and then harvest it in June to early July. There's a great publication through our NMSU publication list. Publication H234 gives you all the insights on garlic planting as well as different recommended varieties. I know for all of the seeds and for the garlic, some of the companies are backlogged this year for fulfilling orders or have already sold out. If you're able to share and get some from other farmers, that will be great. Or do not despair. See if you can get some from the seed companies. The ones from the grocery store, I would not recommend planting. A lot of times they have been sprayed with a chemical to retard their growth. So you may get them to grow, you may not get them to grow. And some of them are not best for some of our areas as well. If you go to the farmer's market and pick up garlic from some of the farmers there, that will be great to plant out. And I think the co-op should be fine too if you pick it up from there, because as long as it's a local source grown here in New Mexico. So be careful with your seed source, but the grocery store I would not get to, but check around to see if there is garlic in the area.
We have a garlic question that's just come up, John. Can
Yes.
I cut off the scapes to cook with, or do I need to leave them for bulb plant health?
You may cut off the scapes. So garlic scapes are great, and garlic scapes are good to leave on if and only if you are a garlic breeder. Otherwise, it takes energy away from the bulb. So I would recommend cutting the scapes and enjoying them in a nice saute or a salad, however your pleasure is. If you're breeding garlic, then yes, keep them on, but otherwise cut them off and you get usually you get bigger bulbs.
Okay, a follow-up question is a good one. What is a garlic scape?
The garlic scape is when the garlic starts to bolt and starts to create a flower head. It looks like a curlicue, and it has a little bit of a flower head at the very top. And if you ever seen a flowering onion, no pun intended, also called an allium in the spring, garlic looks very similar to that. It's a little bit of a white flower, smaller, but if you've seen some of those flowering alliums in the spring, the garlic scape will come out as a little curlicue, and there is a flower head inside of that.
Thank you. And also, should the garlic be planted on a sunny side of the garden or a shady side of the garden? And as you answer that, I'm also going to go find the NMSU's extension pub on garlic production. So I'll link to that in the chat for everybody else.
Perfect. So with I would say it needs to be in sun to partial sun for it to grow best here in New Mexico. And with that said, though, when it gets to be high summer, it benefits from a little bit of partial shade, if I can speak well. But for the winter months, if it will do well just in sun to partial shade, I would probably err more on partial shade. So if it does freeze, it stays frozen and doesn't thaw as quickly. Where if it's on the south side of the house and it's being hit every day with that hot sun, it may come up quicker. So I would probably say put it into partial shade where the temperature remains fairly even and does not warm up too quickly for that. Any more questions, Marisa?
That's it. Thanks very much.
Yep. Leaf lettuce also does good here in the fall, and leaf lettuce actually prefers it on the cooler side than on the warmer side. I know quite a few people who planted their lettuce in May and then all of a sudden June it bolted. That's because it doesn't like the heat. It likes it on the cooler side. The one thing it does not like, though, is freezing temperatures. So you may see some black tips on your lettuce when it gets really cold. And here we have leaf lettuce. We have a nice red and green mix of leaf lettuce here that is under row cover. And I cut the part of the picture out, but it's also inside of a hoop house growing. And this was up in Espanola, and they were growing all winter long. So yes, you can grow leaf lettuce all winter long. And if it gets really, really, really cold, you may need to put some secondary protection on it. It's a really fast growing crop, anywhere from 30 to 45 days from seeding to first harvest. And you can get multiple harvests off of this. When it starts turning bitter or starts slowing down, you may want to reconsider replanting. I know some people who will plant it on the 1st and the 15th of each month just for stagger planting. So that way when one gets done after 3 cuttings, they're ready for the next and just kind of rotate with it. So multiple harvests are possible with this. I would do some staggered planting all throughout the winter, and you can have some great leafy greens all the time. And they do need some secondary protection, as you see here with the row cover. And you're probably going to ask me what that row cover is. It is an agribond. What the weight is, I will tell you towards the end of the session. Here we have some spinach. Again, spinach is another great leafy green. It takes about 30 days to harvest. These spinaches were in our garden, demo garden here. Thank you, Master Gardener, for taking care of them a couple years ago. During the deep of winter, they really slowed down and really did not do much. They do need to be protected. They're under the plastic protection here. We harvested about once every 10 days, let them grow back. When they got really cold, they kind of just sat there, and then when it started to warm up and got more sun, they started growing back again. You still can get multiple harvests off of them, and they do benefit from some cold protection. They can take a light frost, yes, but they do not take hard freeze as well, so you do need to protect them. If you do have them under cover, especially when it's above 40 or 45 degrees, make sure you give it some good aeration so it doesn't overheat on itself.
Thanks, John. I have a couple questions for you, and I wanted to let everybody know that some questions I'm saving for the end. And then, so for now, we do have, when you're showing that picture of the lettuce, Rose, was that cloth or plastic?
This is a cloth that's called agribon. So the plastic is over the hoop house, and this is more of a cloth mesh that's either called rail cover or agribon. And I'll give you that name. I have a slide that shows this a little bit closer with
Okay,
the
thank
product
you.
name and everything.
And then another question about both the lettuce and the spinach is, do you cut them to the ground?
You can, I would cut them about a half an inch above the ground. So you want to leave some of the crown for it to regrow back. So don't cut it to the ground, but get close enough to the ground, but still leave enough green tops for it to grow back.
Thank you. And another one, when you stagger planting and harvest the leaf veggies, can you replant the same green in the same spot?
For the winter months, you may. So, because usually that's going to be a short season. So you can, if you're in a small space, that's fine. If you're in a larger space and want to stagger or do some different plantings in between, just see what your planting does. So for a month or two, it's fine, but I wouldn't have it in continual production for more than 3 months.
Great, thank you.
Kale is a great other leafy green. It takes a little bit longer to ripen, anywhere from 60 to 90 days. So even in the northern climates, don't fret. Get it out there and see what you can get it up. It germinates best in warm soils. And some varieties are more cold hardy than others. When I lived in North Germany, they leave their kale, or grünkohl as they call it, out all winter long, and it's called the palm tree of the north. And what they do is they wait until the most killing frost and the snow hits it. The leaves look sad, but it sweetens up the kale beautifully. So if you are going to grow it during the winter months, make sure you get a cold hardy variety that can withstand the cold, and it really cooks up beautifully and has a lovely sweet taste. So you can have your iced kale smoothies for breakfast or as a nice little retreat. So just make sure you have the nice cold tolerant varieties. It may benefit from a little bit of light protection, so that agribond if you're really concerned. But if your plants are well established, you really don't have to worry about them too much. Swiss chard is another one that's nice and thick and will grow fairly well in our cold. Swiss chard is a close cousin to the beet. And if you look at the seed, it's hard to tell the difference between a beet seed and a Swiss chard seed. And sometimes Swiss chard is also known as leaf beets. So keep that in mind. It's best to sow them directly into the soil 4 weeks before frost. It really prefers the cooler weather. Again, you can cut and they grow right back again, so you can get multiple harvests throughout the year. They will lagger a little bit in the deepest cold of winter and when we have the littlest of light, but they'll do just fine. And I know some people who left them out all winter long with just some light protection, and they do just fine. For the coldest of regions, you may have to do some extra protection, but for those of you that are in the mild to warmer climates, the Swiss chard will be growing happily all the time, and it can tolerate a light frost just as well too. So heavy freezes may not so much. It may not kill it. It may knock it back a little bit, but it can tolerate the cool just fine. Radishes are another one that is great. You have many different kinds, from the red ones, the French breakfast, the icicles and daikons. Some of them are anywhere from 30 to 70 days from planting to ripening. Again, they like a little bit more looser soil. If you want to stagger your plantings, that will be great because then you can get multiple plantings at any one time. As compared to the spring planted radishes, the fall radishes are not as spicy or not as hot and pithy. Temperature really influences the character of the radishes. So planted out in the cooler weather, they do a lot better. So for the cooler areas, I would get them out now and start planting. They will benefit from some light protection when it does get colder, The tips can get some frost burn, but as you leave the plants grow, they should be protected since they're growing into the soil. I couldn't find a good picture of my peas, so I need to go out to the farmer's market and get some. But peas are another great one to plant at this time of year. So get them into the ground now, get them up, and hopefully you can get a harvest. The warmer climates, you definitely can get a good crop out of this. The cooler climates, you're just going to be right on the cusp of things. Peas can take a light frost if they are well established. If we're getting continually hard freezes, they are not going to do as well. Whether you're doing shelling peas or snow peas, it's great to plant them out again. You need to keep them harvested to encourage them to keep blooming and set. One challenge that the peas need to ripen is they need active pollinators. So if it gets too cold, the bees or the other pollinators may not be visiting your flowers, so you may have to play pollinator for your peas. So that was one challenge with them if you are going to grow peas for the cooler months. You can definitely do so. Northern climates, get them out now, and hopefully you can get something out before it gets too cold. All the mid to mild to warmer climates, get them out, and you should get quite a bit of crop of peas yet out again. And as they ripen when they're cooler, they really have a nice flavor to them as well.
John, we did have a question come in, excuse me, about when you mentioned light protection on the previous slide, I believe. What do you mean when you say light protection?
What I mean by light protection is having that row cover or agribond at the thinnest level as compared to the thicker level, or having a plastic or double row cover over things. So if it's just going to be a light frost at night, you can just do a light agribond at the lightweight. If it's going to be cold for a longer period of time, you're going to need to have more protection onto some of your plants.
Thank you.
And towards the end, I'll get to some of the protection things. So if we need to have that question reprised, we may. Broccoli and cauliflower is another great one for the cooler months. It's best to start them 4 to 6 weeks before frost, get them hardened off, and then transplanted. So for some of the cooler climates, especially out west or up in the higher elevations, it would have been best to get them started in early August to get them planted out, so that way they could be established before the really hard cold hits. For the mild and southern climates, now is a great time to get them started in your little greenhouse or get new starts started, and then get them hardened off towards the end of September and planted out before our hard freezes hit. They really do like it cool. You won't see them bolting as much. They can take a light frost as well. If we're going to be continually in a hard freeze situation, you may see some damage and dieback with them. Again, some protection with the agribond, or if you have it in a hoop house situation, great. They can take the cold, a little bit of the cool if it's cool at night, but if the temperatures are not going to be much above freezing, you may see some damage to both of them. Similarly as with Brussels sprouts, some varieties are more cold hardy than others. And again, it can take a nice frost and a little bit colder temperatures. It takes longer to develop. So you need to get them sown out in midsummer. So even though we're about 3 weeks out from fall, for some of the cooler areas, if that got planted about 2 weeks ago, great. So for our warmer climates, you can get them out now, and they will be great for your Thanksgiving dinner. So even for the cooler climates, get them out now if you can, if you do have Brussels sprouts transplants. If you have an opportunity for a mini hoop house or doing stuff under row cover, you can get them growing all winter and enjoy these for your Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner. And how many of you all love your Brussels sprouts for Thanksgiving dinner? I know I do like mine with a little bit of cranberries and slivered almonds. So if anyone has that for Thanksgiving, I would love to I'll bring a nice gift for you. So Brussels sprout stew, tolerate the frost, but not the deep, deep cold, and do best for our milder winters. And Brussels sprouts, broccoli, and cauliflower, they're all in the same family, and they're very close cousins to each other. So that's why a lot of the families, a lot of the plants in the brassica families, they're coming from colder climates and do well for our colder months.
Thank you. We have a couple questions. One about Swiss chard and kale. They're growing them already this summer. Can I keep them into the fall? And I have that question for my garden too.
The answer is yes. So if you already have them from the fall and from your summer garden, just keep picking the leaves, keep them healthy. If they're looking spent, I would reseed, but if they're actively growing and doing well, just keep them up and you're game ahead. And for the deepest of winters, you may want them protected if you get really cold. But if you just have a mild winter, you can bring them right through.
Thanks. Okay, another one about Brussels sprouts. It says, my Brussels sprouts are currently only producing large leaves. Will this change as the autumn, winter comes? That's
hard to say. It depends on what your garden situation is. Hopefully, with the change in temperatures, they should start heading out and making heads, but that's no guarantee. If your soil, if you put too much nitrogen or manure into your soil, a lot of times you may only get leaves and not enough veg out of it. So check to see, hopefully with the cooler temperatures, hopefully it'll head out for you. We'll just have to see what that variety does.
Thank you.
Carrots are another great one to plant. Get them sown 4 to 6 weeks directly into the ground. You may need to thin some out as you're going. They germinate best in the warm soil, but they ripen so buttery sweet when the garden gets cooler. They will need some protection. So doing some covering or some tunnels, you can keep them in the ground or in your raised beds. They will benefit from a light straw or leaf mulch, and they prefer looser soils and not heavy clay. So if you do have heavy clay, try to loosen that up or grow them in raised beds would be great. For carrots, as well as for your beets coming up, watch out for mice damage if you're going to keep them. You can keep them out for most of the winter until about late January, early February for the colder climates. Down for the warmer climates, you may be able to get them through all winter long, and you can just dig out a little bit for what you need each and every time. The cool weather acts as a refrigerator and keeps them nice and fresh all the time. So you can have fresh carrots with your fresh salad for Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, or any holiday feast that you have over the winter months. Beets are another good one as well. Get them planted 6 weeks before frost. Both the bulbous stem and the leaves are edible. The beets germinate well in warmer soils, but ripen up again sweeter when it's cooler out. And also, when it's cooler out, they produce more sugars, and your colors are deeper when they're winter ripened. They tolerate the cool fantastically. The deep cold winters, again, they may not come through as well, but give them protection and watch for little mice or other critters eating on the on your beet bulbs. Hopefully nothing comes at them, but just keep a good eye on things. And again, go ahead.
There's a question related to field mice. Which vegetables do they target, or maybe which ones do they not target?
When mice are hungry, what don't they eat? So all of these have sugar, and they're needing sugar stores either from seed. So if they can get quick sugar, even for us, if we can get quick sugar and a quick energy, they're going to go for what they feel has both water and sugar in it. And what has water and sugar in it for them? Your beets and carrots. So they'll go after nuts and other things for their den, but if they've underneath the straw or near your raised beds, or find a good food source, they are going to they're going to come back to it. So just keep an eye on things to make sure that your plants are protected.
Thank you. I'm going to keep questions for the end so that you can get through to your end of your slides.
Okay. Again, turnips you can treat like beets and carrots. Plant them 6 weeks before frost. Germinates well in the warm soils, and they do well in cooler weather. Some people are using turnips instead as a cover crop and let them rot in their field. So it brings in tilth and it helps to break up the clay soil. So if you're one that does not like to eat turnips, but instead would like to let it be a cover crop, that's great. Or if you wanted to feed it to your cow or your horses every so often, or your pigs, that's fine too. I'm not the best turnip person, but I know some people do, and it is a good winter hardy vegetable. So I just put that forth as an opportunity. But one of my favorite winter veg is kohlrabi. And if you've never eaten kohlrabi, you are missing out. You need to sow it about 6 weeks before frost again. It germinates well in warm soils and ripens best in cooler weather. Again, it's in the same family with all the brassicas. The leaf and the bulb is edible, and you can slice the bulb like you do jicama, and it really has a tart apple, crunchy flavor like a green apple. So I enjoy it, and it does great in salads. You can saute it. It's a very versatile vegetable that's underused. So that's my little plug for kohlrabi. It'll tolerate a light frost just well, give it protection for the deepest cold of winter, but for the holiday dinners, it makes a lovely coleslaw and a nice colorful for the holiday table too. So I've been talking a lot about cover. So in this picture, we have our mini hoop house that we built out in our garden. What we did for that is did electric conduit that was UV rated. We covered it with 6 mil plastic and we doubled it over. And we used spent drip tape to adhere it to our wood frame. And then we opened up the wood frame on the warmest of days. So it does need good air circulation. So for your hoops under plastic, if it's 40 to 50 degrees outside, it's equally 80 to 90 degrees inside. So it needs to be aired out every so often. There's something called row cover called Agribond. You want the lower the number, it's more of a row cover to keep out insects or just light frost and cold protection. The higher the number, upwards of 70 to 90, will give you more frost and cold protection. What some people will do is they'll use the 30 or 50 inside of their hoop house, or if they're growing outdoors, what they'll do in the ground is they'll create these mini hoops with plastic, keep them weighted down, and then have another layer of the Agribond inside of that for the coldest of nights. So give everything a try to see how it works for you. If you are doing have cold frames, what you may want to do is have some old window frames on the west side of the house where it warms up a little bit better so you can grow in there. I also, for raised bed gardening, might insulate it with some straw bales or put straw bales around to hold down your row cover to provide some insulation to your plants. So it just depends on how cold you are going to get. For all of these, for the Agribond or the 6 mil plastic, you can find most of these online or from Farm Tech or Johnny's or any of those organic or agricultural companies. A lot of them have this Agribond row cover or the 6 mil plastic that you can get, or even the greenhouse and garden supply stores. There's some here in town. If you do go to like Home Depot or some of the garden centers, double check what the rating is. They do have row cover, but a lot of it is it's under 19. It's great for insect protection, but not for cold protection. And what Agribond is a woven cotton and mesh that helps to protect the plant. So it is a spun woven mesh that is used, whereas the 6 mil is a plastic, and it is UV rated, and we can usually get 2 or 3 years out of it. It just depends on how bad the wind takes things from around here. So for some additional resources, I would highly encourage you to watch myself, as well as some other extension associates, as we built a low-cost hoop tunnel at the Rio Grande High School in the South Valley. So there's a YouTube clip for that. There's some plans from the University of Maine Extension on how to build mini hoops with raised beds. The NMSU publication series, the web link is here. There's hoop house vegetables, homegrown gardening, and growing zones and recommended varieties. The University or Utah State Extension, as well as Texas AgriLife, both have a fall planting gardening guide. So for our friends down in El Paso, Las Cruces, Roswell, and Carlsbad, I would recommend you to look at the Texas AgriLife bulletin. There's some great recommendations for you. For those of you that may be up in Raton, Springer, out in some of the Navajo lands or in some of the colder areas, the Utah State Extension publication is great. And even here in Albuquerque, I would probably recommend looking at this one in conjunction with our NMSU publications. All of these are great resources. So try to find what climate zone is best fits you. And if you have any questions, you may email me. My email is here, garlisch@NMSU, and I was the one that sent you stuff. Our vegetable specialist is Stephanie Walker. Marisa Thompson, her email is here. She's the one who's been moderating and answering questions. Our staff here, and they'll be speaking a little bit later, so if you have questions for them, or reach out to your local extension agent as well if you have a good relationship with them. And if you don't know who they are, give me an email and I'm glad to connect you. And also Amanda Skidmore, who will be speaking in 2 weeks, and she is our integrated pest management. So at this time, I would entertain more questions. And Marisa, if you want to start going, we'll go for it.
All right, great presentation. You went through a lot of information really in a great pace. So I did keep a list of some of the questions that were not answered earlier. One of them that just came up is, are we going to be doing fruit tree trimming in future talks? And I actually can't remember the answer to that. Is that on our list?
So we're in November, we're going to be talking about winter tree care and winter tree planting. We need to double check to see if that's on the docket for next spring. But if you have particular questions about fruit tree pruning, email both myself and Marisa, and we'll be glad to help you out with that. So that's a great topic, and we should. I think it should be on the list, and will be talked about.
Okay, so I did want to you already mentioned it, but I want to give a shout out here about our upcoming presentation with Dr. Amanda Skidmore in 2 weeks, pollinator habitat for the autumn and winter. And then the two coming after that are the humble herb and seed saving. And so then as far as questions that we have that are still pending, so one is, when's the next in the series? And so here's how you go register for them. But let me find my list of questions. So one question that came up, let's see, I'm not seeing it. Oh, here it is.
Let me ask and answer one question. There is a couple questions on the pre-registration list is, can we still grow tomatoes and peppers in the southern part of the state? And the answer is outdoors, no, but in a greenhouse that's heated, yes. You will still get frost in Las Cruces and Carlsbad, and those tomatoes and peppers and eggplant, all of those that are in the solanaceous family, like it warm. So unless you're growing in the greenhouse, all of those warm season crops, you will not be able to winter through. So outdoors, no. Indoors with protection and heated, yes.
Okay. Linda just asked, can I plant bush beans now?
Can you plant bush beans now? The answer is, it depends. If you're down south in the warmer area, you may get a crop out before Halloween. If you're in the cooler to northern climates, the answer is no.
Okay. Kimberly asked at the beginning, what's the purpose of a cover plant or cover crop?
So the purpose of a cover crop is to help put nutrients back into the soil, also to keep the microbiome and a healthy soil. So when you continually plant something and just take from it, you denude the soil. But if you let the soil rest, using a cover crop, mow it down and let it break down into the soil, it helps to put nutrients back into the soil, as well as some of the legumes help to fix nitrogen, and the nodules help to put more nitrogen back into the soil. So it is a cover crop, helps to keep the soil, A, healthy, B, helps to protect the soil from erosion and blowing away, because we need to keep our topsoil precious. And so there's a lot of great benefit to doing cover crops. So even if you're not doing an edible crop, it is great to have a cover crop of mixed species to bring the soil health up, but it also benefits the microbiome of the soil, the beneficials, and even our insect populations.
Thank you. All right, so somebody asked for the links that were on your final slide, so I'm going to paste them here in the chat.
And all of you, I should say, most of you should have gotten these slides earlier. If you did not, please email me. With so many people, I hope I got everybody, but some people last minute may not have gotten the slides. So if you did not, please email me, and I'm glad to resend these slides back out to you.
Okay, a couple more questions. One is from Tyra early on. What's the ideal depth for a raised bed?
So the ideal depth for the raised bed is, it depends on your back.
Good.
Jokingly aside, you need about, certain crops need more root zone than others. A good rule of thumb is about 18 inches. Because carrots, if you get some of the longer ones, are going to grow about 12 inches long. And some of the roots are going to take up 6 to 8 inches. So I would prefer anywhere from a 12-inch to 18-inch bed for a raised bed. Well, I was joking with my back because as all of us start to age, and even if we're bent over the whole time, we start to feel it in our back. So for those with bad backs or that have bad knees, the higher the bed that you can work in, it is easier to plant and to harvest. And even then, if your bed is 3 foot tall, again, having about 12 to 18 inches worth of soil profile is great. You can fill up the rest of it with old wood or logs, or if you have some concrete or something that, or rock, or you can fill it up with some other inert material. Know that with raised beds, you are going to get some settling and loss of soil, so you do need to replenish that every so often.
Thank you. Also on raised beds, should cover crops be used on raised beds?
Yes, cover crops work great for raised beds. So why not? You want to have healthy soil regardless of if it's in the ground or in the raised bed. So if you have a larger raised bed situation, go ahead and put a cover crop in. Keep this all that good biome healthy.
Great. And what's the plan with our recording of this and the final slides? Will those be shared with registered viewers again?
So, so we are recording this video. We will have it edited, and then we will let people know once it will be on the Desert Blooms Ready, Set, Go page. So if you go to desertblooms.nmsu.edu, click on the Ready, Set, Grow link button. We will hopefully have it there in the next week or so, and it will be available for viewing, and the slides will accompany that as well.
Thank you. Okay, a couple more questions. Can garlic be grown in pots?
Give it a try and see. It grows best when it's cooler out, so if you're keeping your pots indoors, it may not do as well. It does need some cold formation, but it should grow fine if you're growing in pots. Just keep it in a protected area.
Okay, and then another question from Joy. Some folks use galvanized tubs. Do you recommend them?
Galvanized tubs are okay. Some people are, the jury is out if the galvanized tubs are leaching into the soil or not. So if you have galvanized tubs and want to use it, great. Just make sure it has good drainage to things. So if someone else has a different opinion, love to hear it. We do have a galvanized tub out here that we're using for herbs, and they seem to be growing just fine. Just know that during the summer months, they can heat up, and if your tub is surrounded by cold, you might freeze out your roots and kill your plants. So anything that's above ground, that high, you may need to wrap with insulation to keep the soil from freezing out.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It looks to me like we have maybe 5 plus more questions.
Sounds good. I saw one that come through about inoculating. So
Yeah.
what it is for legume cover crops, you need to have the seeds inoculated, so that way they can start the nitrogen fixation as they're going. So there is something called inoculated legume seeds that you buy. So let me look back at my slides for just a moment. So like for the Austrian pea, and any of those leguminous crops, you want the seeds to have an inoculant in them or treated with that. So like the Austrian winter pea, the common vetch, or the canola or rapeseed, all of those should come already pre-treated with an inoculant.
Okay.
What that inoculant is, I don't know the exact name for, but they do need to be treated so that way they can start the process of turning air nitrogen into usable nitrogen for the plants.
Okay, Andrea asked, to overwinter carrots, should you trim the green top back over winter and break the carrot from the soil to cut the roots?
To overwinter carrots, I would put a little bit of mulch down, like some straw or some leaf mold, maybe some agribond cover. Keep the greens growing. Don't break off anything. Just let them be.
Okay. And then also, it's Sizzy asked, I have limited space and actually grow carrots in a wide, deep container. If I leave them out, do I need to protect the pot from freezing?
You do need to protect the pots from freezing, yes. If they're ripened now, depending on what your cold level is going to be at your place, just make sure they're not rotting in the soil. So that would be the one thing. So if they're mature now, go ahead and eat them and enjoy them. If they're just growing now and you're about 4 to 6 weeks from harvest, protect the pot and just keep them, make sure that the pot doesn't freeze out.
Thank you. Michelle asked for some clarification about which way the sun moves in the winter, or the direction of the sun in the winter.
So the direction of the sun in the winter, the sun always rises in the east and sets in the west. But with the tilt of the earth, in the midsummer, our sun is in the northern sky, so to speak. When it is during like the fall and the spring equinox, it is right above us. And during the winter months, it is in the southern part of our sky. So if you watch the sun during the summer months, it's in our northern sky, and during the winter, it's in our southern sky. You may not quite visualize it, but it is present that way, and it does make a difference on the way the light and the shadows come through.
Okay, so then a couple more. When do you mow your cover crop? That's from Janet.
So when do you mow your cover crop? So it depends on what type of cover crop you have, and if you are trying to terminate the plant. So if you're wanting to plant a vegetable crop in, you need to terminate that crop about 3 weeks before planting. If you have a perennial cover crop, you can mow that every time it gets to a sizable height that you can put that back into the ground. So you can either mow it or crimp it. It just depends on what your strategy for cover crop is. And Janet, if you want to email me a little bit more specifically about what you are growing, I can kind of help you on what your long-term strategy is. There's no one right way to do things, but what I will say is don't let things go to seed and brown out. You want to terminate those cover crops when they're green so you can get the benefit of that full green capacity going back into the soil. And then you can do multiple cover crops from a spring cover crop, summer's cover crop, and a fall winter cover crop, and really get a diversity of plants to really put nutrients back into the soil.
Thank you. Baby asked, would it benefit my garden to put compost scraps from the house directly on the garden during wintertime?
Why not? So I know some people who will do some double digging and make their compost troughs. So what I would say is dig your trough and put some of your compost in there, let it break down. And I would probably cover it with a row cover or something so that way it is warm enough for all of those good microbes and insects to break it down so that way it is there for your plants to use it next spring. If you have a lot of kitchen waste that's still present in the soil next spring, maybe cover that up and let it actively grow, or clean that out and put it into your compost pile. But yes, you can put your kitchen scraps in there, or if you want to put it through your blender or something and chop it up before putting it into the garden, that will help speed up the process.
Wonderful. Okay, Kimberly asked, are tires bad for growing food?
I would avoid tires for growing food if at all possible. As the rubber starts to deteriorate, there is oil particles in there. The same for railroad ties as well. I would avoid them for growing edible food. The jury is still out, and I need to ask a few more questions to see if the plant is uptaking those things as we're eating. But as a rule of thumb, I would plant landscape plants and flowering plants in tires, but I would not plant edible plants. That's just a personal preference. And Marisa, if you have something different opinion, let me know.
Thank you. I agree. And the railroad ties question has come up recently, and so I looked into that. And the problem is that it depends on so many different factors. It's really hard for us to give a recommendation on that. So the safe bet is to not use them.
So I would say use them in your landscape for your pretty stuff, not for your edibles.
Yeah, good point. So then another question is from Bob. What temperature do you cover and uncover your winter veggie plot?
So if it's going to be anything with frost at night, I would cover up things. And then if it's going to be above 40 degrees during the day, I would uncover stuff. So okay. That's kind of my rule of thumb.
Thank you. I see one more that says, I have a lot of problem with purslane in my garden. And so is a cover crop going to help with that? And what do you recommend?
So if you're one that would like to eat purslane, you have your winter vegetables growing right there. For cover crop, the thick purslane likes to grow in open, exposed, and denuded areas. So if that fits your area, cover crop will help to smother. The seed bank for purslane is anywhere from 60 to 80 years deep in the soil. So anytime it's turned and it has the opportunity to grow, it will. But the healthier you can keep the soil and the more pressure that you can put from a thicker cover crop, that will help to choke out the purslane and keep it from growing.
Great. I think that's most of the questions that I got on the side and that we had in the chat box, and we're here for 417.
Excellent. So if you do have further questions for me, please email me, Garlisch at NMSU. All of our emails are there in the PDF, so please reach out if your question wasn't answered or if you have more specificity for your area. We're glad to help out. And with that said, one last thing, I need to do an exit poll. So if you would take the time, how would you rate our presentation for today? Was this helpful for you or not helpful? Give us a rating if you would, please.
One more question came in from Tyra. Are we going to offer any classes for growing in a greenhouse?
As of right now, we are not, but stay tuned for 2021. Growing for the Greenhouse will be a great 2021 segment. So great suggestion, and we'll get to working on putting those resources together for 2021.
All right, thanks very much, John, and thanks everybody. How's the poll going? Does everybody fill that out?
We're getting there, so we're gonna just a few more moments here.
Okay.
So if you would fill out the poll, greatly appreciated.
All right.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for participating. Have a great rest of your day. Happy gardening, and I wish you success in your fall and winter veg gardening, and love to hear your stories and share pictures afterwards.